Of all the objects that have passed through the rooms at 221B Baker Street during my long association with Sherlock Holmes, the poisoned letters, the coded telegrams, the severed thumbs in cardboard boxes, the diamonds hidden in plaster busts, none unsettled me quite so profoundly as a sketchbook. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in February of 1900, wrapped in brown paper and tied with common string. There was no letter of explanation, no return address. The postmark was smudged beyond legibility. The only identifying mark was Holmes's name and address, written on the wrapping in a hand that was neither educated nor uneducated. The careful, laborious penmanship of someone who does not write often, but who takes great pains when he does. Holmes examined the wrapping with his customary thoroughness before opening it. He noted the paper, cheap, widely available, purchased from any stationer's or general shop. The string, ordinary household twine. The postmark, blurred, but possibly from the East End, based on the fragment of text that remained legible, and the handwriting, slow, deliberate, formed with the concentrated effort of a person for whom writing is not a natural act.
Exceptional quality. The details are exquisite.
Someone who works with their hands rather than a pen, Holmes observed. The calluses have affected the grip. You can see it in the pressure variations, and the ink is the kind supplied free at post offices, which suggests the package was addressed at the counter rather than at home. He cut the string and removed the wrapping. Inside was a sketchbook, a cheap, commercially available volume of the sort sold for a few pence at art supply shops, bound in malt brown card with roughly 80 pages of cream-colored drawing paper. It had been used extensively. The pages were thick with drawings, pencil sketches, some shaded with charcoal, some touched with watercolor, and the quality of the work was, from the first glance, remarkable.
Page 43. No, this can't be right. Good Lord.
I say remarkable because I mean it in the strict sense of the word. The drawings were worthy of remark, of attention, of sustained examination. They were not the casual doodles of an idle hand. They were accomplished, detailed, and possessed of a quality that I can only describe as intensity. A concentrated, almost ferocious attention to visual detail that suggested a mind for which seeing was not a passive act, but a form of engagement as active and demanding as thinking itself. Holmes turned the pages slowly. The subjects were varied: street scenes, buildings, faces, animals, the interiors of rooms. But they shared a common style. Dark, precise, heavy with shadow and atmosphere, rendered with a sophistication that seemed at odds with the cheap materials on which they were executed.
Watson, come quickly. Look at this. Good heavens, Holmes, what is it? A discovery of the gravest nature.
And then Holmes reached page 43. He stopped. His hands, which had been turning the pages with steady rhythm, went still. His grey eyes, which had been scanning the drawings with professional interest, narrowed to points of concentrated focus. He stared at page 43 for a long time. 15 seconds, 20, 30. And then, very carefully, he turned to page 44, and 45, and 46.
The sketches. They mirror the crimes exactly. It's impossible.
And with each page, the stillness in his body deepened, and the expression on his face shifted from curiosity through recognition to something I had rarely seen there. Something that looked, improbably, like apprehension. "Watson," he said at last, "come here." I crossed the room and looked over his shoulder at the sketchbook. Page 43 showed a drawing of a man lying on a cobblestone street. The man was face down, his arms at his sides, his legs slightly splayed. The street was recognizable. The particular curve of the buildings, the shape of a distinctive lamp-post, the sign of a pub visible in the background, as Hanbury Street, in Whitechapel.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Interesting. Very interesting indeed.
This is a crime scene, I said. It is, and a very specific one. 6 weeks ago, a man named Robert Teal was found dead in Hanbury Street in precisely this position. The case was handled by Inspector Aberline. Teal had been struck from behind and robbed. The case remains unsolved. He turned to page 44. Another drawing. This one showed the interior of a room. A bedroom by the look of it, with a bed, a washstand, and a window. A woman's shape was visible in the bed, the covers pulled up, the face peaceful. On the floor beside the bed, a small bottle lay on its side, a dark liquid pooling from its mouth. Mrs. Agnes Mowbray, Holmes said. Found dead in her lodgings in Bethnal Green on the 7th of January.
Hypothesis 1, fraud. 2, a gifted clairvoyant. 3, a force we don't yet understand. Which is it, Watson?
Apparent poisoning. The inquest returned an open verdict. Page 45. A warehouse interior, dark and cluttered. A figure slumped against a wall. Crates and barrels around him. A rat in the foreground, detailed and vivid. Daniel Fitch, dock worker, found dead in a warehouse on the Isle of Dogs on the 20th of January. Cause of death undetermined. I stared at the drawings. They were not merely illustrations of crime scenes. They were forensically accurate illustrations of crime scenes, capturing details of position, setting, and circumstance that matched, with eerie precision, the actual events as they had occurred. Holmes, how could the artist know these details? These crimes were not widely reported. The positions of the bodies, the specific settings.
Keep your wits about you, Watson. The streets here listen. Right, Holmes. Careful where you step.
This is information that only someone who was present at the scenes would possess. That is one possibility. The other possibility, the one that is considerably more disturbing, is suggested by the dates. He pointed to small numbers written in pencil at the bottom of each drawing. Page 43 was dated the 10th of December. Page 44 was dated the 28th of December. Page 45 was dated the 12th of January. The drawings are dated before the crimes they depict. In each case, the drawing was made several days before the crime occurred. The room seemed to contract around us. I looked at Holmes, and for once his face offered me no reassurance. His grey eyes were bright with the particular intensity that accompanied his most serious investigations, and his jaw was set with the grimness of a man who has recognized that he is dealing with something that does not fit within the comfortable boundaries of rational explanation. Someone is drawing pictures of crimes before they happen, I said. So it appears. And there is one more drawing, Watson. The most recent, page 46. I turned to page 46. The drawing showed a large, ornate building, a theatre by the look of it, with classical columns and a grand entrance. Before the theatre, on the pavement, a figure lay sprawled, and above the figure, looking down from an upper window, another figure was visible. A silhouette, barely defined, watching.
Tell me, Barnett, precisely what did Rook's words mean at the time? I understood it to mean he sought to escape.
The date at the bottom of the drawing was the 15th of February, 5 days from now. This crime has not yet happened, Holmes said, but if the pattern holds, it will happen on or around the 15th. We have 5 days, Watson, 5 days to find the artist, understand the drawings, and prevent a murder that has already been illustrated. Holmes spent the remainder of that morning examining the sketchbook with a thoroughness that bordered on the forensic. He subjected every page to scrutiny, not merely the crime scene drawings, but the earlier sketches of streets and buildings and faces, looking for patterns, for recurring locations, for any identifying detail that might lead us to the artist. The early drawings, he said, spreading several pages across the desk, are studies, practice pieces. The artist is training his eye and his hand, learning to see and to reproduce what he sees with increasing accuracy. The subjects are almost exclusively drawn from the streets of East London, Whitechapel, Bethnal Green, Stepney, the Docklands. This is a person who lives and moves in these areas. A working-class artist. A self-taught one, almost certainly. The technique is accomplished but idiosyncratic. There are no signs of formal training, no evidence of the standard exercises that an art school would impose.
The scent of old paper and strange chemicals. It's quite a display.
This person has learned to draw through observation and practice alone, and the level of skill suggests years of dedicated effort. This is not a recent hobby. This is a lifelong practice. The handwriting on the package suggested someone who works with their hands. Yes, and the materials confirm it. The sketchbook is the cheapest available.
Ah, yes, here it is. Deeper lines. A signature, perhaps. What do you see, Holmes?
The pencils are of ordinary quality. The charcoal is homemade. You can tell by the irregular texture. And the watercolors are the kind that come in a small tin box for a shilling or two. This is a person of very limited means who is devoting what resources he has to his art. You keep saying he. Are you certain the artist is male? Holmes paused. No, I'm making an assumption based on the physical evidence, the pressure of the handwriting, the type of calluses implied by the pen grip. But I should not assume. The artist could be female. He returned to the crime scene drawings. The critical question is how these drawings were produced. There are three possibilities. First, the artist witnessed the crimes and drew them afterward, misdating the drawings to create the appearance of prediction. This is the simplest explanation, but also the most problematic, because it requires the artist to have been present at 3 separate crime scenes in different parts of East London over a period of several weeks. An improbable coincidence, unless the artist is also the perpetrator. The second possibility: the artist is connected to the perpetrator, an associate, a family member, someone who has advanced knowledge of the planned crimes. In this case, the drawings represent not prediction, but foreknowledge. The artist knows what is going to happen because someone has told him. And the third? Holmes hesitated. A rare thing. The third possibility is that the drawings are genuine predictions. That the artist possesses some faculty. Call it intuition, call it second sight, call it what you will. That enables him to perceive events before they occur. You do not believe in second sight, Holmes. I do not believe in the supernatural, but I believe in the existence of mental faculties that science has not yet fully explained. There are people whose powers of observation are so acute, whose capacity for pattern recognition is so highly developed, that they can perceive the probable outcome of a situation long before it becomes apparent to others. This is not prophecy. It is perception. Perception operating at a level that appears, to the untrained observer, indistinguishable from prophecy. You are describing yourself. I am describing a principle. Whether the artist embodies that principle remains to be determined. Holmes gathered up the sketchbook and his notes. We must find this person, and we must do so quickly, because page 46 gives us a deadline. The drawing shows what appears to be a theatre. The date is the 15th of February. We have 5 days. The search for the artist began where the drawings themselves began, in the streets of East London. Holmes reasoned that a self-taught artist of this caliber, working in the poorest districts of the city, would not be entirely unknown. Art, even in the East End, has its communities. The settlement houses, the working men's institutes, the evening classes offered by philanthropic organizations. Someone, somewhere, would recognize the style. We spent 2 days canvassing the area. Holmes, with his extraordinary talent for adopting the manner and appearance of whatever social class he wished to move among, presented himself at various establishments as a collector interested in the work of self-taught artists. I accompanied him in my usual capacity, observing, recording, and occasionally providing the appearance of respectability that Holmes's more eccentric disguises sometimes lacked. Our first productive lead came from the Toynbee Hall Settlement House in Commercial Street, a pioneering institution that offered education, recreation, and cultural activities to the working poor of Whitechapel. The warden, a young Oxford man named Barnett, examined the sketchbook with the practiced eye of someone who had seen a great deal of amateur art and could distinguish the exceptional from the merely competent. "I know this work," he said. "Or rather, I know the hand. There was a young man who attended our evening art classes for a time, perhaps 2 years ago. He was extraordinary, the most naturally gifted draftsman I've ever seen, and I include several Royal Academy graduates in that comparison. But he stopped coming. His name? Thomas Rook. He was, let me think, 18 or 19 at the time. A dock worker's son, I believe. Lived somewhere in Limehouse." "Why did he stop attending?" Barnett hesitated. "There was an incident. He drew something during one of the classes that disturbed the other students. A scene of violence. Very detailed, very realistic. The instructor asked him to confine himself to the set subjects, still life, landscape, that sort of thing. And Rook became agitated. He said he drew what he saw, and he could not choose what he saw. He left and did not return." "He drew what he saw," Holmes repeated. "Those were his exact words?" "His exact words." "What did you understand him to mean?" "At the time, I assumed he meant that he drew from life. From scenes he had witnessed in the streets. The East End is not a gentle place, Mr. Holmes. Violence is commonplace. A young man growing up in these streets would have seen a great deal that most people would prefer not to look at, let alone draw. But now, in light of the drawings in this sketchbook—" Barnett looked at the crime scene pages, which Holmes had shown him without explaining their significance. "Now I'm not so sure what he meant." The address Barnett provided led us to a narrow, soot-blackened street in Limehouse, a grim thoroughfare of cramped terraces and shuttered shops that smelled of the river and of the industries that lined its banks. Number 17 was a lodging house of the most basic kind, a building divided into single rooms, each one barely large enough to contain a bed and a chair, rented by the week to men who worked the docks and the warehouses. The landlady, a broad, suspicious woman named Mrs. Guppy, confirmed that Thomas Rook had lodged there for the past 3 years. He was a quiet tenant who paid his rent on time, kept to himself, and caused no trouble. He worked intermittently at the docks, casual labor, loading and unloading, and spent the rest of his time in his room, drawing. "Always drawing," Mrs. Guppy said. "Morning, noon, and night. The walls of his room are covered with pictures, tacked up everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, even the back of the door. I told him he'd lose his deposit if he damaged the plaster, but he didn't seem to care." "Is he here now?" "He went out this morning. He usually comes back around dark." "May we see his room?" Mrs. Guppy was reluctant. The privacy of her tenants was, she maintained, a matter of principle. But Holmes's persuasive combination of professional authority and a half-sovereign overcame her scruples. She led us up 2 flights of narrow stairs to a door on the 3rd floor and unlocked it with a key from the heavy ring at her waist. The room was small, perhaps 8 feet by 10, with a single window that looked out onto the backs of other buildings, a narrow iron bed, a wooden chair, and a small table that served as both desk and dining surface, and every inch of the walls was covered with drawings. I stood in the doorway and stared. Holmes entered the room and stood in the center, turning slowly, taking in the extraordinary gallery that surrounded him. The drawings were pinned, tacked, and in some cases pasted directly to the plaster, overlapping and layering until the original wallpaper was entirely invisible. They were of every size and subject. Street scenes, faces, buildings, animals, ships, clouds. And they were, without exception, executed with the same intense, precise, shadow-heavy style that characterized the sketchbook. But it was not the quantity or quality of the drawings that arrested me. It was the fact that, scattered among the ordinary subjects, distributed seemingly at random across the walls, mixed in with the street scenes and the portraits, were drawings that were unmistakably different in character. Darker, more urgent, drawn with a heaviness of line and a density of shadow that set them apart from the surrounding work like bruises on otherwise healthy skin. These drawings showed scenes of distress and danger. A man falling from a great height, a woman screaming in a dark alley, a building consumed by smoke and flame, a figure running through rain-slicked streets pursued by something unseen. Each one was rendered with the same forensic precision as the crime scene drawings in the sketchbook, the same attention to specific architectural detail, the same accuracy of spatial composition, and each one bore a small penciled date in the corner. Holmes examined several of them closely, then consulted a small notebook he had brought with him, a record of reported crimes and incidents in the East End over the past year, compiled from police records and newspaper reports. "This drawing," he said, pointing to one showing a warehouse engulfed in smoke, "is dated the 3rd of September. On the 8th of September, a warehouse fire on the Ratcliffe Highway killed 2 dock workers." He pointed to another, a man falling, arms spread. "Dated the 19th of October. On the 22nd of October, a stevedore named Mullins fell from a crane at the West India docks and was killed." And another, a woman in a dark street, her face contorted. "Dated the 14th of November. On the 17th of November, a woman named Lily Hatch was assaulted in a lane off Cable Street." "Every one of these drawings predates the event it depicts by 3 to 5 days, Holmes said, "and every one of them corresponds to a real incident that actually occurred." "Holmes, this is impossible. It is improbable. Impossible is a word I prefer to reserve for things that violate the laws of physics. This does not violate the laws of physics. It violates our understanding of cognition, which is a different matter entirely." He stood in the center of that small, extraordinary room and looked at the drawings that surrounded him. The dense, obsessive, meticulous record of a mind that saw things before they happened. And for perhaps the first time in my experience, I saw Sherlock Holmes genuinely uncertain about what he was dealing with. "We must meet Thomas Rook," he said. "And we must do so before the 15th. We waited. Holmes positioned himself in the street outside the lodging house, adopting the appearance of a casual idler, a cap pulled low, a pipe in his mouth, his tall frame slouched against a wall in a posture that reduced his height by several inches and made him effectively invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking for him. I waited in the room itself, seated in the wooden chair, with Mrs. Guppy's grudging permission and another half-sovereign. Thomas Rook returned at 6:30. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, light, quick, the tread of a young man in a hurry. And then the door opened, and he was there. He was not what I had expected. I'd imagined, unfairly perhaps, someone wild-eyed and disheveled, the popular image of a mad visionary. What I saw instead was a young man of 19 or 20, of medium height and slight build, with a pale, sharp-featured face that was notable chiefly for his eyes. They were large, dark, and possessed of a quality that I can only describe as alertness. Not the nervous alertness of anxiety, but the deep, calm, all-encompassing alertness of a person who is perpetually and intensely aware of everything around him. He looked at me, and I felt with absolute certainty that in the 2 seconds his gaze rested on my face, he had absorbed and catalogued more visual information about me than most people would gather in an hour. He did not seem surprised to find a stranger in his room. He did not seem alarmed or angry. He simply looked at me, and then he looked at the walls, at his drawings which I had been examining. And then he looked back at me and said, "You've come about the sketchbook. How did you know?" Because I sent it, and because you're a doctor. I can tell by your hands and your bag, which means you're Dr. Watson, which means Mr. Holmes is somewhere nearby. At that moment, Holmes appeared in the doorway behind him. Rook turned, looked at him with the same calm, comprehensive gaze, and nodded. Mr. Holmes, I was hoping you'd come. You sent the sketchbook to me. Why? Because the drawings are getting worse. More frequent. More detailed. And the next one, the one with the theater, I think someone is going to die. And I can't stop it alone. Holmes entered the room and closed the door. The three of us stood in that small space, surrounded by the dense gallery of drawings, and the conversation that followed was one of the most remarkable I have ever witnessed. Tell me about the drawings, Holmes said. From the beginning. Rook sat on the edge of his narrow bed. His hands, strong, calloused hands that belonged on a dock, not in a studio, rested on his knees. His dark eyes were steady. I've always drawn. Since I was small, my mother gave me a pencil and a piece of paper when I was 3, and I drew the cat. She said it was perfect. Not a child's drawing, but a real cat, with the right proportions and the right expression. She kept it. I still have it. You are self-taught. I went to some classes at the Toynbee Hall, but I didn't learn anything there that I didn't already know. Drawing is not something I learned, Mr. Holmes. It's something I do, like breathing. I look at something and my hand reproduces it. There's no thought involved, no decision. It just happens. And the predictive drawings? When did those begin? Rook's steady gaze dropped for the first time. He looked at his hands. About a year ago, it started with small things. I would draw a scene, a street corner, a building, a face, and then, a few days later, I would see that exact scene in real life. At first, I thought it was coincidence. I draw so much, and I draw what's around me, so it seemed natural that some of my drawings would match things that happened later. But it continued. It continued, and it got more specific. I would draw a man standing on a particular corner at a particular time of day, and 3 days later, there he would be. I would draw a fire at a particular building, and the building would burn. I would draw an accident at the docks, and the accident would happen. And you began to draw crimes. I didn't choose to draw crimes, Mr. Holmes. I don't choose any of it. The drawings come to me. I don't know how else to describe it. I sit down with my pencil and my paper, and my hand moves, and what appears on the page is not what I intended to draw. It's something else. Something that hasn't happened yet but is going to happen. You describe it as involuntary. It is involuntary. I've tried to stop. I've tried drawing other things deliberately. Flowers, landscapes, things that have nothing to do with violence or crime. But the other drawings come anyway. They push through. It's like, imagine you're trying to have a conversation and someone in the next room is shouting. You can hear the conversation, but you can also hear the shouting, and eventually the shouting drowns out everything else. Holmes studied the young man for a long time. I could see the competing hypotheses at work behind his grey eyes, the rational explanations jostling against the evidence, the desire for logical clarity pressing against the apparent impossibility of what he was hearing. Mr. Rook, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it with complete honesty, regardless of how it makes you appear. Ask, is it possible that you are not predicting these crimes but causing them? That you draw a scene and then, in some state of which you are not consciously aware, you go out and make it happen? Rook looked at Holmes with an expression that was neither offended nor surprised. It was the look of a man who has asked himself the same question many times and has not been entirely satisfied with his own answer. I've thought about that. I've wondered. But the answer is no. I can account for my movements on the dates when these crimes occurred. I was at the docks during 2 of them. There are people who can confirm it, and I have no motive, Mr. Holmes. I didn't know these people. I had no reason to harm them. Then how do you explain it? I don't explain it. I can't. I see things that are going to happen, and I draw them, and then they happen. I have no theory about why or how. I only know that it is real, and that it frightens me, and that when I drew the scene at the theater, I knew I had to send the sketchbook to someone who might be able to do something about it. Why me? Because you're the only person in London who might believe me. Holmes took the sketchbook and Rook's testimony back to Baker Street, and he spent the next 24 hours in one of the most intensive periods of analysis I had ever witnessed. He did not sleep. He ate sparingly. Mrs. Hudson brought up trays that were returned largely untouched. He examined every drawing in the sketchbook with his magnifying glass. He cross-referenced the predictive drawings against newspaper reports, police records, and his own extensive files on East End crime. He made notes, drew diagrams, and conducted 3 separate chemical analyses of the paper and pencil marks, looking for any physical anomaly that might explain the apparent prescience. He found none. The paper was ordinary. The pencils were ordinary. The charcoal was homemade but unremarkable. There was no hidden message, no code, no trick. The drawings were exactly what they appeared to be. Extraordinarily accurate depictions of events that had not yet occurred at the time they were drawn. I am left with 2 explanations, Holmes said, on the morning of the 13th, 2 days before the theatre drawing's date. Either Thomas Rook possesses a genuine faculty of precognition which violates everything I believe about the nature of the universe, or there is a connection between Rook and these crimes that I have not yet identified. What kind of connection? Consider this. Rook lives and works in the East End. He moves through these streets every day. He observes. He is, by any measure, one of the most acute observers I've ever encountered. His drawings of ordinary street scenes demonstrate a capacity for visual perception that is, frankly, superior to my own. Superior to yours. In the visual domain, yes. I observe details that others miss, but I do so through a trained process of deduction. I look for specific things, guided by theory and experience. Rook sees everything. His perception is not selective. It is comprehensive. He absorbs the entire visual field, every detail, every nuance, and his hand reproduces it on the paper with photographic fidelity. And you believe this perception extends to the future? I believe it extends to patterns. Rook's mind is constantly processing the visual information it receives. The positions of people, the conditions of buildings, the dynamics of social interactions. And it is identifying patterns that predict future events. He does not see the future. He sees the present so completely that the future becomes, in certain cases, predictable. That is an extraordinary claim. It is an extraordinary ability, but it is not supernatural. It is the extreme end of a spectrum that includes every competent detective, every experienced physician, every skilled sailor who reads the weather. We all predict the future to some degree, based on our observation of the present. Rook does it with a precision and a specificity that is, to the best of my knowledge, unique. And the theatre drawing. Holmes picked up the sketchbook and opened it to page 46. The drawing was, as I have described, a scene showing a large theatre with classical columns, a figure sprawled on the pavement before it, and a silhouette watching from an upper window. I have identified the theatre, Holmes said. It is the Royal Standard Theatre on Shoreditch High Street. The classical columns, the entrance canopy, the distinctive arch above the main doors, all are consistent with the Standard's facade. And the figure on the pavement? That is what we must prevent. Someone is going to be killed, or at least seriously harmed, at or near the Royal Standard Theatre on or around the 15th of February. Rook's drawing tells us the where and the approximate when. What it doesn't tell us is the who or the why. Can we not simply have the police watch the theatre on the 15th? We can, and we will, but a police presence may deter the crime without identifying the criminal, which means the criminal remains free to act again elsewhere at a later date. I want to catch the person who does this, not merely postpone their actions. Then we need more information. We need Rook. His drawing contains details that his conscious mind may not have registered, but that his subconscious has encoded in the image. I want to go through the theater drawing with him, detail by detail, and see what his extraordinary perception can tell us about the crime that is about to happen. We brought Rook to Baker Street the following morning, the 14th, one day before the predicted event. He arrived in his working clothes, a rough jacket, heavy boots, a cap, and he looked around the sitting room with the comprehensive, absorbing gaze that was his defining characteristic. I had the strong impression that, within seconds of entering the room, he could have drawn every object in it from memory with perfect accuracy. Holmes placed the sketchbook on the desk, opened to page 46, and positioned a strong lamp above it. "Mr. Rook, I want you to look at this drawing and tell me everything you see. Not what you remember drawing, what you see now, as though you were looking at someone else's work." Rook bent over the drawing. His dark eyes moved across the image with a slow, systematic attention that reminded me powerfully of Holmes's own method of examining a crime scene. "The theater," he said. "The Royal Standard. I've been there a few times. They do melodramas, music hall acts, pantomimes. The columns are right. The arch is right. The entrance steps, 3 steps, stone, slightly worn on the left side where most people walk. What time of day is the scene set?" Rook looked more closely. "Evening. The shadows are long, cast from the west. The gas lamps are lit. You can see the glow here and here. There are people on the street. Not many, but enough to suggest it's early evening, before the theater crowd arrives. The figure on the pavement. Describe what you see." Rook's jaw tightened slightly. "A man. He's lying on his back. His arms are at his sides. He's wearing a dark coat, expensive by the cut. Good shoes. He's not a working man. He's someone with money." "Can you see his face?" "No, the angle is wrong. The face is in shadow." "And the figure in the window?" Rook leaned closer. "Upper floor. 3rd floor, I think. There's a pattern on the window frame that matches the Standard's upper-level offices. The figure is, it's hard to tell. A person, standing back from the window, not leaning out. Just watching. The posture suggests, I don't know how to describe it. Control. This is someone who is watching what they expected to see. Male or female? I can't tell from the silhouette. The shape is ambiguous." Holmes nodded. "Now, the details around the edges. The things you may not have consciously noticed when you drew this. The street, the buildings, the incidental objects." Rook moved his attention to the periphery of the drawing. "There's a handbill on the wall of the theater. I can make out part of the text. It says, 'Grand Performance,' and something underneath. A name, maybe. I can't read it. Can you enlarge it? Redraw that section larger from what your memory tells you?" Rook looked at Holmes with surprise. Then he took a pencil from the desk and, on a blank sheet of paper, began to draw. His hand moved with extraordinary speed and confidence, the pencil flowing across the paper as though guided by an intelligence independent of his conscious mind. Within 2 minutes, he had produced an enlarged rendering of the handbill on the theater wall. The text was now legible. It read, "Grand Performance. Friday, 15th February. The great Dorabelli, master of illusion and enchantment. One night only." "The great Dorabelli," Holmes said, "a stage magician, performing at the Standard on the 15th, the date of the predicted crime." He turned to me. "Watson, do you know the name?" "I have seen it on playbills. He is, or was, a popular performer. Stage magic, illusions, escape acts. He has played the major music halls." Holmes was already reaching for his coat. "We must learn everything we can about the great Dorabelli, his history, his associates, his enemies. A man who performs on stage is a man who stands in a public place at a predictable time, the ideal target for a planned attack. He paused at the door and looked back at Rook, who was still sitting at the desk, his dark eyes fixed on the drawing he had just made. "Mr. Rook, you have been more helpful than you know. The detail you extracted from your own subconscious, the handbill, the name, the date. These are things your conscious mind did not register when you made the drawing, but your eye saw them and your hand recorded them, and your extraordinary visual memory has now made them available to us. This is not prophecy, this is perception, and it may be the most remarkable perceptual ability I have ever encountered." Rook looked up at him. "Then you don't think I'm mad?" "I think you are a great many things, Mr. Rook. Mad is not among them." The great Dorabelli, whose real name we discovered was Arthur Marsh, was a man of 42 who had spent 20 years on the stages of London's music halls and variety theatres. He was not a first-rank performer. He had never played the Alhambra or the Empire, but he was competent, reliable, and popular with the audiences of the secondary venues. His act combined traditional stage magic, card tricks, disappearing objects, the classic cups and balls, with more elaborate illusions involving cabinets, boxes, and an assistant who, in the tradition of the profession, appeared and vanished at his command. Holmes obtained an interview with Dorabelli at the Royal Standard Theatre on the afternoon of the 14th, the day before the performance. The magician was in the process of setting up his apparatus on the stage, and he received us with the cheerful, slightly guarded manner of a performer who is accustomed to dealing with the public and has learned to be pleasant without being revealing. He was a handsome man, dark-haired, dark-eyed, with the kind of mobile, expressive face that is an asset on stage. His manner was warm, his handshake firm, and his conversation peppered with the easy humor of a professional entertainer. "Mr. Holmes, an honor, a genuine honor. I've read about you in the Strand. Dr. Watson's accounts. Magnificent stuff. If you ever fancy a career on the stage, I could use a man with your deductive powers in my act. I shall bear the offer in mind, Mr. Dorabelli. I wonder if I might ask you a few questions." "Of course, anything for the great detective." "Have you recently received any threats? Any unusual communications? Any indication that someone wishes you harm?" The cheerfulness dimmed. Not dramatically. Dorabelli was too practiced a performer for that. But perceptibly. A flicker in the dark eyes, a slight tightening of the mobile mouth. "Why do you ask?" "I have reason to believe that an incident may occur at your performance tomorrow evening. I cannot be more specific at present, but I would like to take precautions." Dorabelli was silent for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "My former assistant, Eliza Vane. Tell me about her. She worked with me for 6 years. She was part of the act. The girl who gets sawn in half, who vanishes from the cabinet, who appears from nowhere in a puff of smoke. She was good at it. She understood the mechanics. She knew how every trick worked. And she left. I dismissed her 8 months ago. There were personal complications. She wanted more than a professional relationship, and when I couldn't give her that, things became difficult. There were arguments, accusations. Eventually, I had to let her go. And since then, she has written to me several times. The letters were angry, accusing me of ruining her career, threatening to expose my methods, to reveal how the tricks are done, which would be professionally devastating. I ignored the letters. I thought she would move on, but she has not moved on. Last week I received a letter that was different from the others. It didn't threaten exposure. It simply said, "You will perform at the Standard on the 15th. I will be watching, and this time the disappearing act will be real." Holmes's expression sharpened. "She threatened your life." I suppose she did, though with Eliza, it was always hard to tell the difference between a genuine threat and a dramatic gesture. She is theatrical, Everything with her is a performance. Where is she now? I don't know. She left London after I dismissed her. The last address I had for her was in Brighton, but she may have moved since then. Holmes took the letter and examined it. The handwriting, the paper, the ink. Then he looked at Dora Belli with an expression that combined professional concern with something more personal. Mr. Dora Belli, I want you to perform tomorrow evening as planned. I do not want you to change your routine, alter your stage positions, or do anything that might indicate you are aware of a threat. I will be in the theatre, with Dr. Watson and with officers from Scotland Yard. We will ensure your safety, but I need you to perform as though nothing is wrong. You want me to be bait. I want you to be yourself, on a stage, doing what you do. The difference is that on this occasion, the audience will include a detective and several constables. Dora Belli looked at Holmes for a long moment. Then the performer's smile returned, brighter now, harder, with an edge of determined bravery beneath the showmanship. I've performed through hecklers, through food thrown at the stage, through a gas leak that nearly asphyxiated the entire front row. I can manage a stalker in the gallery. I shall hold you to that. The Royal Standard Theatre on a Friday evening was a place of noise, heat, light, and the particular concentrated energy that a crowd of working people generates when they have put aside the labor of the week and are determined to enjoy themselves. The auditorium was large. It held perhaps 800, and on the night of the 15th, it was nearly full. The audience was the usual mix for a Shoreditch variety theatre. Dock workers, factory hands, shop girls, costermongers, and a scattering of the more adventurous middle classes who occasionally ventured east for what they considered an authentic experience. Holmes and I were in a private box on the first tier, a position that gave us a commanding view of both the stage and the auditorium. Lestrade and 3 plainclothes officers were distributed throughout the theatre. 1 in the gallery, 1 in the stalls, and 1 backstage. A constable had been positioned at the stage door. Rook was with us. Holmes had insisted on his presence, arguing that his perceptual abilities might prove valuable if the situation developed in unexpected ways. Rook sat in the shadow at the back of the box, his dark eyes moving ceaselessly across the theatre, scanning the audience, the galleries, the exits, the stage, with the comprehensive, absorbing attention that was his extraordinary gift. The great Dora Belli took the stage at 9 o'clock. He was, I must admit, an entertaining performer. Quick, confident, with a patter that was witty without being condescending, and a technical proficiency that produced genuine gasps of surprise from the audience. Cards appeared and vanished. Coins multiplied in his fingers. A woman's watch was removed from her wrist and discovered inside a sealed envelope on the opposite side of the stage. The audience loved him. During the interval, Holmes turned to Rook. "Have you seen anything?" Rook's dark eyes were troubled. "There's a woman in the 3rd tier, left side. She arrived late, after the first act had started, and she's sitting at the end of the row near the stairs. She hasn't applauded once. She hasn't smiled. She's watching the stage, but she's not watching the act. She's watching him." Holmes directed his opera glasses toward the location Rook had described. After a moment, he said, "Dark-haired woman, approximately 30, wearing a dark blue coat. She is indeed watching Dora Belli rather than the performance. Can you see anything else? She has something in her lap, under her coat. Her right hand keeps moving to it and then pulling away. She's making a decision." Holmes lowered the glasses. "Lestrade's man in the gallery is too far away. Watson, go to the gallery stairs and position yourself near the woman's row. Do not approach her. Do not alarm her. Simply be present. If she makes a move toward the stage, intervene." I went. The gallery stairs were narrow and crowded. It took me several minutes to reach the correct level and work my way along the corridor to the door that opened onto the left side of the 3rd tier. I entered as quietly as I could, found a position near the end of the row where Rook had indicated the woman was sitting, and waited. The second half of the performance began. Dorabelli returned to the stage with his larger illusions. The cabinet of vanishing, the levitation of his new assistant, the dramatic escape from a locked trunk. The audience was rapt. I watched the woman. Rook's observation was accurate. She was not watching the performance. She was watching the performer. Her face was pale, set, and carried an expression that I recognized from my medical practice. The expression of a person who has reached a decision after long internal struggle and is now committed to carrying it out. Her right hand moved to whatever was concealed beneath her coat. This time, it did not pull away. She stood. I stood at the same moment, moving to block the aisle between her and the stairs that led down to the stalls, and from there, to the stage. "Miss Vane," I said. Her name, Dorabelli had told us, was the only weapon I had. "Miss Vane, please sit down." She looked at me. Her eyes, dark, intelligent, burning with something that was not madness but something more dangerous, which was certainty, fixed on my face with an intensity that stopped me mid-step. "You know who I am." "I do, and I know what you are planning. It is not going to happen. Not tonight." For a terrible, suspended moment, I thought she was going to push past me. Her body was tense with the coiled energy of intended action, and her hand was still beneath her coat. Then, from behind me, I heard footsteps, quick, light, familiar, and Holmes's voice, calm and carrying. "Miss Vane, whatever is in your hand, I would like you to set it on the seat beside you and step into the aisle." She looked past me at Holmes. Something in her face changed. Not a collapse, not a surrender, but a recognition, the recognition that the performance was over. She withdrew her hand from beneath her coat. In it was a small theatrical pyrotechnic device, a smoke cartridge designed to produce a dramatic flash and cloud when triggered. Not a weapon. Not lethal. But in a crowded theater, it would have caused panic, a stampede, injuries, and, quite possibly, the chaos in which a more direct act of harm could be committed. She set it on the seat. She stepped into the aisle, and she allowed herself to be escorted from the theater by Holmes and Lestrade's officers, walking with the straight-backed dignity of a woman who had lost a battle, but had not lost her nerve. On the stage below, the great Dorabelli completed his final trick, the escape from the locked trunk, to thunderous applause. He bowed. He smiled. He had no idea how close he had come. The aftermath was both simpler and more complex than I had anticipated. Eliza Vane was charged with possession of a dangerous device and with intent to cause public alarm. She was not charged with attempted murder. The smoke cartridge, while dangerous in a crowded theater, was not a lethal weapon. Holmes testified at her hearing that while her actions could have resulted in serious harm through the panic they would have caused, the device itself was not designed to kill. She received 18 months. It was, under the circumstances, a lenient sentence, and I suspect that Holmes's testimony, which was, for once, more sympathetic to the accused than the prosecution would have liked, influenced the outcome. Dorabelli, Arthur Marsh, continued his performing career, though he left London shortly after the incident and took his act to the provincial circuits. I heard, some years later, that he had married his new assistant and retired to run a boarding house in Margate. The magic, one assumes, continued in private. And Thomas Rook. Thomas Rook sat in the Baker Street sitting room on the evening after the theatre incident and looked at his sketchbook, which Holmes had returned to him, with an expression of weary bewilderment. "It happened," he said, "just like the drawing. The theatre, the man on the pavement. Well, it would have been the pavement if you hadn't stopped her. And the figure in the window, that was her, watching from the gallery. It happened because the conditions for it to happen were present, and your mind perceived those conditions before anyone else did, Holmes said. You did not see the future, Mr. Rook. You saw the present, the tensions, the relationships, the trajectories of human behavior, with a clarity and a specificity that enabled you to project the probable outcome. But I didn't know Eliza Vane. I didn't know Dora Belli. I'd never been to the Standard before. You didn't need to know them personally. You moved through the same streets, the same neighborhoods, the same social world. You have been absorbing information about the people and places of East London for your entire life. Your mind processes this information, the faces you see in the street, the conversations you overhear, the tensions you observe between people, and it identifies patterns that predict future events. The drawings are the output of this process. They are not prophecy. They are analysis. Unconscious, involuntary, but genuine analysis. And the earlier drawings, the ones that matched real crimes? The same principle. You observed, without consciously registering it, the conditions that preceded each crime, the movements of the perpetrators, the vulnerability of the victims, the environmental factors that made the crime possible. Your mind processed these observations and produced a drawing that represented the most probable outcome. You make it sound rational. It is rational. It is the rational functioning of an extraordinary mind. The irrationality lies not in your ability, Mr. Rook, but in the fact that science has not yet developed a framework to explain it. That is a failure of science, not of your perception. Rook looked at Holmes for a long time. What do I do with it? It was, I thought, the most important question anyone had asked in the course of the entire case. And Holmes's answer, delivered with a thoughtfulness and a care that I found deeply characteristic of the man at his best, was worth recording. You continue to draw, Mr. Rook. You draw everything you see, the streets, the faces, the buildings, the clouds. You develop your extraordinary gift through practice and discipline, and when you draw something that troubles you, something that suggests a crime or a danger, you bring it to me. Not because I can explain your ability, but because I can act on its results. You want me to work with you. I want you to use your gift for the purpose it was given to you, which is, I believe, the protection of the people among whom you live. You see things that others cannot see. That is a responsibility, not a curse. And it is a responsibility that is better shared than borne alone. Rook looked at the sketchbook in his hands, the cheap, mottled brown volume that contained the visual record of an ability that science could not explain and that the world would probably never understand. Then he looked up at Holmes with an expression that was, for the first time since I had met him, free of the anxious uncertainty that had shadowed his remarkable eyes. "I'll keep drawing," he said, "and I'll bring you what I see." "Good. And Mr. Rook?" "Yes. Buy better pencils. You deserve them." Rook laughed. A short, surprised, genuine laugh that transformed his sharp young face and made him look, for just a moment, like what he was. A 19-year-old with an extraordinary talent and a future that, for all its strangeness, was suddenly a great deal less frightening than it had been. He left Baker Street that evening carrying his sketchbook under his arm. Holmes and I watched him from the window as he walked down the street, a slight figure in a rough jacket disappearing into the London evening. "He will be useful," Holmes said. "He is more than useful, Holmes. He is remarkable. He is both. And he is something else, Watson. Something I have encountered very rarely in my career." "What is that?" "He is a reminder that the world contains more than my methods can explain. That observation, which I have always considered the highest faculty of the human mind, has dimensions I have not yet explored. Thomas Rook sees things I cannot see, not because his eyes are better, but because his mind processes what his eyes receive in a way that is fundamentally different from my own. He is proof that there are modes of perception beyond deduction, and that is—" He paused, and the faintest smile crossed his sharp features. "That is both humbling and exciting." He turned from the window and reached for his violin. "Baker Street will need a larger mantelpiece, Watson. I foresee a great many sketchbooks in our future." The violin sang. The evening settled. And somewhere in the streets of London, a young man walked home carrying a gift he did not fully understand and a purpose he had only just begun to discover.